All right. Good morning from Alaska. Welcome and thank you for joining the Global Arctic Youth Network for this seminar. The Arctic Youth Network is open to all who are interested in shaping the future of the Arctic. This current seminar is part of a series of presentations which are geared towards discussing key issues facing the Arctic and communities around the world as we prepare for the upcoming Arctic Youth Summit, which will be held this October 2018 in Rovaniemi, Finland. My name is Hilary Krieger. I am joining you guys from Anchorage, Alaska. Looking at who is on our attendees list, we have Pétur Halldórsson, who is a Arctic Youth representative in Iceland. Pétur, say hello.
Oh, hello, thank you.
And it appears as though we also have Stina Bagge, who is the woman in Singapore. She can't speak quite yet, but maybe if we're patient, she can actually get on and join us in our discussion. So let me tell you a little bit about why I am here. I have been in Alaska for 2 years, but during that time, I've gotten to see how people not just live, but thrive in the Arctic. However, I've also seen how the Arctic is changing and how that causes hardships for people who live up here. And many people have told me that just small changes, that if everybody were to do them, that would make a big impact on their lives and their livelihoods. So that's ultimately why I'm here. Pétur, how about you?
Yeah, so I think it basically started in 2015 and 16 when I was working as a ranger in the highlands of Iceland in the Vatnajökull National Park, which is a national park around the biggest glacier in Iceland. And after making some public comments on some energy development in the highlands, because it is a very sensitive and special region in Iceland, I kind of drifted into more environmental protection because we have all these, like we say, combination of fire and ice in Iceland. And we feel that it's so important to protect not just the biodiversity, but also the unique geology that we have here. And after realizing or thinking about how all the other Arctic regions are struggling with similar issues, and of course, different ones, I felt it would be necessary for us to be able to connect across the Arctic and actually across the globe. So I think that's why I'm here.
That's actually really interesting. Thank you, Pétur. Stina, can you say as to why you want to be a part of the Arctic Youth Network, if that's at all possible? All right, looks like Stina does not wish to speak up. How about Kate? Can you please speak up as to why you wish to be a part of the Arctic Youth Network? Kate McWilliams from Alaska.
Oh, hi there. So I chose to be, yeah, it took me a while to get unmuted, but I chose to be involved in the Arctic Youth Network because I grew up in Alaska, kind of in, I would say, underrepresented in media and just in general knowledge. And being part of the United States, I felt like a lot of people that I was going to school with in the lower 48, and just like, you know, in the general like media, people didn't really know, they weren't aware of us as an Arctic state and our role as an Arctic nation. And I just felt like I wanted to learn ways to be active as an educator, and just learning about some of the ways that we're affected by being in the Arctic and how other countries are dealing with that.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Okay. Well, Let's launch right into it. So far, we have heard from Pétur Halldórsson, who's an Icelandic Arctic Youth Representative, myself, Hilary Krieger, who is an Alaskan transplant who loves the Arctic. It looks like we have a lot of other people online. Stina Bagge, I believe that is how you pronounce your last name. You are, I believe, not in Sweden at this point in time. You are going to college somewhere else, but you are from Sweden. So yeah, hopefully we can all jump right in and start answering these questions. So question number 1, what is the coolest Arctic related fact for your country? I can tell you what the coolest.
Oh,
nope,
go ahead.
Too late, Pétur. I'm already talking. So the coolest Arctic-related fact for my state, if not my country, is that, in my opinion, Alaska is the biggest state in the United States, which a lot of people like to claim that one statistic as their own, and I enjoy saying, nope, it is Alaska, and you guys are tiny, haha. Pétur, if you wouldn't mind saying anything about Iceland?
Yeah, sure. So I think I would have to say our volcanic activity, because it's not just that we are on the edges of the tectonic plates between North America and Eurasia, but basically the reason Iceland exists is that it just so happens that we also have a hotspot at this exact location, a hotspot like Hawaii, and therefore we have a lot of volcanic activity in combination with our glaciers in the Arctic. So, and also I think if anyone has heard of Iceland, they have probably heard about this combination of fire and ice.
That's pretty cool. Awesome. Stina, if you wouldn't mind saying what a cool thing is to know about Sweden?
Oh, there we go. Oh God, what a question! I haven't thought about this really. I hadn't time to think about it. But maybe the fact that Sweden isn't the only country that has Sami people in it, but we do have our indigenous people are called the Sami people, which are also in Norway and Finland and Russia, as you know. But they're considered to be the oldest ethnic people in Sweden and also the Arctic Circle. I guess that's quite interesting. I don't know otherwise what's interesting in Sweden is the Arctic. But yeah, that might be it.
Thank you, Stina. Elena, I believe that's how you say your name. Would you mind speaking up?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So I guess let's start off. Where are you from, Elena? And if you wouldn't mind saying an interesting thing about your country.
Sorry guys, can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah,
I can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. My name is Elena and I'm from Russia. I'm one of the indigenous minorities that lives in Siberia. We are called Evenki. So it's just my first experience. And I had some technical problems here, so I don't really know what you guys were talking about. but I'm just here, yeah, to find out about all this network and all this. What do you guys do? Because I think it's important.
Okay, thank you very much, Elena. Kate, no worries. Kate, if you wouldn't mind, your chat is turned on. If you wouldn't mind saying what it is that you would like to say.
Oh, sure. I would say Alaska has probably more different climate zones within it than any of the other, than maybe the whole United States, the other lower 48. Yeah, we have rainforest and tundra and alpine, like mountainous areas, and even some parts of Alaska are considered deserts. I thought that's pretty interesting.
Fantastic. And Elena, would you mind saying a little interesting thing about Russia?
You mean in terms of like landscapes and stuff?
So we're going through a list of questions that a bunch of people have sent in to the Arctic Youth Network. And this is just a fun opener question. I don't have to come to you again if you would not like that. It's up to you if you would like to answer or not.
Okay, if I skip that for today, that would be because I just joined and would first like to hear what you guys saying.
Okay. Well, I'll mute your microphone then, okay?
Thank you, yeah.
All right. So let's go on to question number 2, if you guys wouldn't mind. So this question is, what is the main economy of your country and has it changed over time? So Peter, Stina, or Kate, if any of you guys wouldn't mind jumping in. Peter.
Yes. So historically, well, after people first came to Iceland roughly 1,000 years ago, farming was, I think, the primary industry, so to speak. But after industrialization, our fishing became our main economy. But in recent years, we had this huge surge of tourism. And I think maybe 5 or 7 years ago, we had maybe 400,000 tourists per year with our population of 340,000. Well, today, but now we have around or over 2 million tourists per year. So it has been a huge boom.
Wow. Anybody else? Kate or Stina, if you wouldn't mind jumping in? Unless, Peter, would you like to continue speaking? You're still green, that's why I'm asking.
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay. Kate, go for it.
So our primary economy for a long time has been oil, particularly oil on the North Slope. But I think, so we hit our peak in the 70s and oil production has been going down since then. And so we're looking for alternative forms of, I guess, an alternative economy for our state. Fishing is also a huge contributor to our economy, and also tourism a little bit in the Southeast. Yeah.
Okay, so sounds like we have tourism in Iceland. In Alaska, it sounds like we have oil, but that's going downhill, and now we're in tourism in the Southeast, and we're currently looking. Stina, if you wouldn't mind, if you can't, no worries, just curious to know what your economic thoughts are on Sweden.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, it's mainly nowadays like timber and hydropower and iron ore, which is the resource base of an economy in Sweden, and it's heavily oriented toward foreign trade, and the engineering sector accounts for 50% of output and exports, but also like telecommunications and the automotive industry and the pharmaceutical industries are also of great importance in Sweden for the economy. And also, of course, tourism is also a big part of it. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, honestly, I have some more questions, but it sounds like we need to move on to the tourism question. So this question is, how is your community being impacted by tourism? Is tourism rising or falling with climate change? So if anybody wouldn't mind jumping in, that would be fantastic. I know in Alaska, we very much rely on tourism. I work for the federal government, and a lot of our money comes from providing opportunities for people to go out and hunt or to fish. There's massive amounts of fishermen in down in either Kenai or somewhere in that region to hunt, or not hunt, but to fish salmon. There are a lot of airplanes that fly around dropping off hunters who wish to either take a moose, caribou. We have a few rams, like goats up here. Yeah, tourism is fairly big, I think, in Alaska. Anybody else?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing a major factor of why people are coming to Iceland. And well, of course, when an Icelandic volcano stopped all the air traffic in Europe, that made a lot of people aware of Iceland, especially people who were traveling. And because we have such versatile geology on a relatively small island, I think that's a pretty big factor of what draws people to the country. But in terms of climate change, it has not per se maybe affected our tourism, but the tourism has been affecting our nature a lot, because we had this huge increase in tourism numbers and we just did not have the infrastructure to deal with it. So we're still kind of trying to cope, and we're getting there, but that was a pretty big, almost you could say a cultural shock for many living here, because it was such a fast increase.
Wow, thank you, Peter. I didn't realize that tourism was that, not only that prevalent, but that influential on how the Arctic is being viewed in Iceland. That's fascinating. Stina, Kate, do you have anything that you would like to say?
Oh, I would say that in my region, an area of Alaska in particular, I'm out on the southwestern delta between two rivers, and we don't get a ton of tourism, but we do get a lot of bird watchers. And with changing climates, we're fearing that a lot of migratory birds will be changing their migration routes, and that may affect what small tourism industry we have. Yeah, other than that, we don't get a ton of tourism where I am.
Thank you, Kate. Stina, if you wouldn't mind giving us a perspective from Sweden, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a growing sector here for sure. Especially, I think with the in the winter season, we usually get quite a lot of snow up north. So tourism up there includes like winter sports such as skiing and ice skating, and the significant increase in winter temperature that's predicted in the climate scenarios will of course change into major changes in the dynamics in winter, including the mountains. So that's probably will affect tourism here. And I know that there's a few adaptation strategies in the making, including having like artificial snow made. Yeah, that's it.
Huh, really? There's something to create snow. That's actually pretty interesting. I mean, I know that snow can easily be made. It's made all the time where I grew up in Colorado, but usually it melts, or it's snow for about 2 hours and then it turns into ice underneath the sun. I wonder, would you mind saying a bit more about that, if you know a bit more about that?
There we go. I don't know much more about it. I was just talking to someone actually working up there, and he mentioned that the last couple of years there's been serious talks and tries of making artificial snow. I'm not up to date on how it's going and if it's successful, but that's apparently one way that they try to keep people coming back and ensuring that there actually are some slopes going down on. Yeah. But I don't know much more than that.
Honestly, that's a whole lot more than I know, and that's why we make snow in Colorado. A lot of the times they're making snow on ski resorts. So if there is no snow, there is no ski resort, and people will not return. So they're trying to encourage people to come back. So that makes sense. Okay, that's depressing, but that makes sense. All right, so next question. What does other countries' climate action policy look like? And how do these compare to each other?
So maybe I can start with that one.
Yes, sir.
So it's pretty interesting here in Iceland because quite recently the government has decided on a ambitious goal in our climate efforts, and I think it was being carbon neutral in 2030, if I'm not being mistaken. But having said that, we are anticipating that we will have to buy extra quotas for emissions because we're just not being able to fulfill these ambitions. And that's both related to industry and car use and everything in Iceland. And also, if we look at all the imported products in Iceland, which actually are not really in the inside those goals, we have a huge carbon footprint, but it's kind of outsourced to other countries.
Okay, that's rather depressing. Okay, so quite honestly, the United States' view on climate right now is about as depressing, so no worries with that. Kate, Kate, if you wouldn't mind jumping in a little bit to tell what you know, and then I can, I'll tell a bit about what I know. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know a ton about like the US in general, what that is looking like. I think our president even like doesn't have any mention of climate change on his website at all. But the Alaska as a state has just recently, I think just this month, published and made public their climate action plan. And I read through it a little bit, and it talks a lot about adaptation, specifically in villages, because we are already experiencing like villages needing to relocate because of rising sea levels, and permafrost melting, and faster erosion. But it didn't seem to be too specific. But at this point, it's just a lot of goals, and not a lot of like new legislation. But yeah, there's definitely a focus on adaptation. And yeah, sorry, I don't have a lot to contribute there.
You're actually doing fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit more about what, excuse me, our country as a nation is doing. We recently, we elected President Trump, who feels as though the climate is not changing in a way that humanity can impact. He's actually he's commanded that we remove all mention of climate change from many federal agencies. So the Environmental Protection Agency has removed all of their climate change information off of their website. They're not allowed to speak about climate change. And basically what it is that we are seeing now is that many of these states are saying that the climate is indeed changing. If not because of human actions, we can at least alter the way that it is changing with human actions. So a lot of states are putting many policies into place to lessen human actions, or to ensure that cars may pollute a bit less, for instance, or anything like that. It's one of those, we're having a state uprising against federal government in the US right now. It's actually quite interesting. Okay. So Stina, if you wouldn't mind giving us a view from what it is over there in Sweden, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. Just a bit, like, Sweden does have this reputation as an environmental fighter and pioneer, and of course it kind of is. We have done quite a lot, but there's a long way to go. But the country does take the.
We can't really hear you, Stina. If you wouldn't mind moving a bit closer to the microphone, that would be fantastic.
Okay, can you hear me?
A little bit better.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. Well, Sweden does take the global battle against climate change quite seriously, and more than half of the national energy supply comes from renewables. And earlier this year, we did pass legislation which legally binds the country to reach net zero emissions by the year 2045, which is 5 years earlier than previously planned. And it's way more ambitious than what Sweden pledged under the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So I mean that's positive, I guess. I guess what sets Sweden apart is a combination of both like citizen engagement and high ambition levels and international solidarity. So that's kind of the main things that influence the Swedish climate policy. And we do have this roadmap 2050, which is also which is a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared with 1990 by 40% by the year 2020, and to have a vehicle fleet completely rid of fossil fuels by 2030. And that's kind of stepping stones to the overarching goal of a society with no net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And this roadmap 2050 is an EU initiative, which is the objective of that is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 80% below 1990 levels for all of EU. So yes, Sweden is aiming to be a climate leader within the EU, and it does have quite a good reputation, but there are, because we do have that reputation, some people believe that we're doing enough and that we should we can afford to take a step back and just let others do the work, and that's a dangerous game we're playing. But that's a quite a real concern right now, but which Swedish climate activists are facing, that actually Swedish leaders and governments are kind of not really living up to their high ambitions.
Wow. Well, honestly, though, it sounds as though the majority of our countries are basically just laying the framework for our approach to how we are going to address climate change at all. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. It seems like we have a steep challenge ahead of us.
It does.
Yeah, I think we're in the early stages of actually implementing actions that will considerably reach our goals.
Yeah, for sure. I agree completely.
Okay. So I really like the Icelandic idea of ensuring that we don't go over a set amount of greenhouse gas emissions. I know that the US had something similar in place at one point in time. I haven't checked recently to see if that is still what's in place. And Peter did mention that the main aspect is that they are not reaching their goals. I don't know. Peter, would you mind saying a bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically it's the same thing happening as Stina described in Sweden, because we have had this great image about using renewable energy and so and so. So we also kind of became lazy and thought, oh, we're doing so much, we don't need to really do anything. And that was, of course, before anyone thought of accounting for all our imports and the carbon footprint of all of that. And because of that attitude, we are actually now, because we're part of this quota system as part of Europe, and we're actually going to have to pay because we're not going to reach our goals.
Wow. So it sounds kind of like what Stina was saying, only you guys have gone down the rabbit hole and come out the other end, and it's not looking very pretty for you.
Yeah, exactly. Even despite having all our electricity and heating made with at least what would qualify internationally as renewable sources.
Qualify internationally as renewable sources. If you wouldn't mind, can you go a bit more in depth about what that means?
Oh, yes. So what is considered renewable are basically hydroelectric, wind farms, and geothermal energy. But the thing is with geothermal power plants is that each geothermal area is different. And if you make the power plant way too big, like happened with at least one that was built not long before the financial crisis in 2008, then they basically know that in some number of decades, or maybe 100 years, something on that time scale, they will basically have taken out all the energy. And of course, that cannot be considered renewable in any regard.
Wow. Okay. Kate, if you wouldn't mind saying a bit about what your country is doing towards renewable energy and moving us towards a more green landscape, that would be fantastic.
I don't know a lot about the topic of renewable energy. I kind of focus more on waste management. That's my area of interest. But renewable energy.
Well, I know for us, one major aspect of renewable energy that we are currently looking into is wind energy. There are a lot of wind farms coming up around Alaska. Are there any near you?
Yeah, we have a couple in my town. Yeah, but from what I've heard, because we require so much electricity just to heat homes and to keep cars charged in the evening in the winters, it's not really, it doesn't seem like it's the best solution at this point. But I mean, there's always the opportunity for, technological advances.
Oh yeah, I very much agree with that. Stina, if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about renewable energy sources in Sweden, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm no expert in this area, but I know that the share of renewable electricity use is quite high, and I know that hydro and wind and solar power together accounted for around 50% in 2014. So of course it's become higher since then. And since 2003, Sweden supported the renewable energy in the electricity sector with so-called green electricity certificate obligation for retail power suppliers, which is of course also quite good. And if you, within the context of the European Union, which have this renewables directive, Sweden was working towards a 49% share of renewable energy in its gross final consumption of energy by 2020, but it was reported in 2014 that it had already exceeded that target, and it reached then 52.6, I think. So that made the country leading with the EU28 groups in terms of renewable energy used by share, and then it was, I think, Finland and Latvia that came behind. But it's behind both Iceland and Norway in terms of renewable energies, but it's going there as well. But there's a big conflict in Sweden between the renewable energy and, unfortunately, how we protect the Sami people and indigenous people, because there's a tendency to place wind power mills up north where the winds are stronger, and that interfere with the rights of the indigenous people, and that's a conflict which is very real and has to be tackled sometime.
We actually have something somewhat similar happening in the U.S. Up in the Arctic Refuge. There was a bill recently passed saying that we will drill for oil in the Arctic Refuge. This is a big deal for us because the majority of federal lands, if they are under a land management agency, does not allow for any extraction, I guess, from the landscape. So for the most part, no wind, no hunting, no nothing on any of those lands. Though of course Alaska is different because we have subsistence hunting that must occur pretty much everywhere up here. But there are many people who are members of indigenous communities who are very upset about this. So I hear you. All right, Kate, you mentioned that you were more interested in waste management, which that's something that I haven't even really considered. If you wouldn't mind, can you go a bit more into that and why it's so fascinating to you?
Yeah, so I think it really, it became an interest of mine because there is, I mean, with Amazon Prime and I guess things on the barge being cheaper and more easier to get to rural Alaska, we've just been getting more and more things, and there's no way to get rid of things. Basically, Bethel is like an end of the road place for trash. Everything we get just stays and it ends up in our landfill. And this is the same for all the villages in the YK Delta, and I think most of the rural places in Alaska. There's no recycling facilities, incinerators, anything like that, and very rarely is there backhaul to bring waste out of the villages. And in my town, we've seen our landfill grow and grow in a very confined space. We can't expand it anymore. And so they're having to build it into basically a mountain, and they're building up the perimeter of it with the bigger pieces like junk cars or buses or storage vans. And it's just gotten to a scale where we're now looking for like other places around town to expand it, but there hasn't been any research on like the environmental effects of having so much waste in our town, like, you know, seepage into the tundra or into the groundwater that goes into our river, because the landfill isn't very close to, it is very close to our river. And I know in the US in general, our waste management is pretty poor. 80% of things go into the landfill, whereas other countries, like I'm studying abroad in Copenhagen right now and actually learning a lot about the waste management here. And I think European countries in general, a lot more tends to go into recycling or incineration. And yeah, it just seems like an area that needs a lot of work in the US and in Alaska, especially because it's, yeah, taking care of the waste is more of an issue than just bringing it out. Like it's very cheap to just bring trash into rural Alaska, but not really considering the end of life.
That's actually pretty interesting. I've been driving around Anchorage and I've seen many houses with cars that just kind of sit. One car was so rusted out that there was no way anybody could make that roadworthy with anything less than $10,000 in their pockets. There's currently a car sitting in my parking lot that hasn't moved in, I think I've lived here for about 2 years. And I don't think it will move anytime soon. So that's actually really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
All right. So next question. Is sustainability an important topic in primary schools? My fallback, as always, is Pétur in Iceland. Pétur, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, so we actually have a pretty interesting thing going on in Iceland in our schools, because there is this international organizations called Eco Schools, and an environmental NGO in Iceland became, how would you say, the one in Iceland that oversees the project here. So they basically started it, I think, roughly 10 years ago. And then basically, if a school joins the program, they implement recycling, teaching about sustainability and so and so. And I think actually pretty much half of schools in Iceland have on their own initiative joined this program. So that's really something that is, I think it's probably the biggest environmental protection project in Iceland.
That's fantastic. Holy crud. Okay, so Kate, if you wouldn't mind saying next whether or not sustainability is an important topic in primary schools.
We actually didn't discuss it at all in middle school, junior high, high school. Science was purely just biology, or even in my ecology classes, we really didn't talk about, I guess, the threats to ecology. And I wish that we had some kind of program. And I know there's some in other parts of Alaska, but just in the rural areas, that's not a topic that they really discuss at all.
Well, I can say that when I was down in Colorado, where I went to primary school, I learned absolutely nothing about sustainability. I haven't learned anything about it in any school that I have ever been to. I've basically had to educate myself through online readings and just interesting things like that. So I feel like this is a very important topic to teach in primary schools, so it's hard to know where they would insert it. Yes, Peter?
Yeah, and I thought I should add to this discussion that, like I mentioned, it's around 10 years ago since this started in Iceland. So in a relatively short period of time, a lot of things can happen, at least if the structure and management of the schools allow it, and so on and so forth. So I thought at least that even though, like you say, it may not be much done at the moment, it is possible, at least with the right framework, to implement it relatively fast.
All right. That's given that somebody within the school system feels as though we need to implement sustainability into a primary school system, which is, it's difficult to think in the US that would be something that would even happen, much less something that we could pursue.
Yeah, but I mean, if that is something that would be difficult to implement, then that's maybe something, I mean, acting on what makes it not possible or possible, I think would then be a logical thing to act upon.
Next steps. All right. And then finally, Stina, if you wouldn't mind giving us a viewpoint of what you feel it is important to teach kids in primary schools, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I can only, like, when I was in school, I didn't learn much about sustainability either. Like you already said, for me, like, science was more like about, I don't know, the periodic table and like actually learning about what sustainability is and what you can do yourself. That wasn't really part of my education when I was in school. So that I had to learn myself. But I know that it has apparently in a few schools been like outdoor education has had a strong position in the Swedish curriculum, and care for nature and environmental concern have been recurring themes in some schools, but it's not like mainstream, I think, yet, or perhaps it's become nowadays, but I'm not actually super qualified to say much in this question. But I think it's an upcoming theme still. It's becoming more and more important. And actually, you might have heard of it now, but there's this girl, we have elections this year, and there's this girl, 15-year-old, who is on a school strike. So she's sitting alone. Well, I think she's got some company now because there's a few people that actually come along to sit with her and join her in her school strike. But she is sitting outside Parliament, and she's been sitting there for I think 1 or 2 weeks now, striking for the climate, and so that people realize the climate is such an important issue, and that this is the most important and crucial issues in this election period. So that, I guess, that shows that young people are aware of the problem. So she's super cool. Check her out. She's called Greta. So if you Google Greta Sweden school strike, you'll find her. It's very interesting. It's super cool.
That's fantastic. If you wouldn't mind sending me an email with her name, I'll be sure to put it in the comments section of the YouTube video that I'm going to be posting, just so that everybody can know who it is that you're talking about. So thank you very much. Okay, so next question. How do kids connect with nature and face the issues of climate change in your country? Peter.
All right. So I guess I basically have a similar answer because of how involved these, you could call them eco-schools when they join the eco-school program, how involved the students have been, because it's not just that they just implement some classes about sustainability, but they actively engage the students to act themselves. And they are, for example, to maintain their status, because if they fill all the criteria, they get a flag, so they have a little bit to celebrate, and they get it every 2 years, and they always have to go deeper into the subject to maintain it. They can't just start recycling and then keep it for 10 years. So they have actually been going into those, I think the English term is transformative education, that somehow, lets the students actually take the initiative of how they want to deal with it. And for example, they have these days about biking to school and recycling, etc. So there are many things happening, but of course, even though it's a big number to have half the schools in this program, we have the other half who's not. So we're still working on it, but yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Kate from Alaska, if you wouldn't mind chiming in as to how kids can connect with nature and face the issues of climate change.
I would say getting involved in groups of like-minded youth. Like for me, joining Arctic Youth Ambassadors was my first opportunity to speak out about climate change and how it's affecting my community. And I think that's a really powerful platform for a lot of youth. And even starting like a local chapter at your school, I wish I had known a little bit more about some of the programs that were available for students in the city, so that I could have something to model after in my school. But it wasn't really, I didn't really know about it. I think also just writing op-eds, getting your opinion out there in social media and in newspapers, pictures have a lot of impact. And that's always a good way to not just share with people around your state, but also around your nation. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kate. Stina, if you wouldn't mind giving us your viewpoint from Sweden.
Yeah, I can only agree with what has been said, but actually if you were talking about young children, like taking them outside in nature, like learning how nature works and like that, why they can play outside. I know that I think my interest and dedication to climate and nature was that I grew up in the countryside, far from the cities, and basically every day I ran barefoot on small trails behind my house, and played outside all day, which of course no everybody doesn't have that opportunity, but I think like most cities nowadays does have like green parks or green areas, so I think it's important for kids to actually be outside and get that possibility to climb and run and kind of at an early age get that connection with nature. And then I think it comes quite naturally to get involved in projects and groups if you have that grounding in the beginning. Yeah, so basically start with play and then make it more serious.
Yeah, I very much agree with what everybody has been saying. Basically, from what I have seen, just be aware of all actions and aware of what that could do to the environment around you. Like, let's see, a few days ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go drive 2 hours south just to go see what it's like down there. And then I was actually kind of thinking about leaving my apartment to go 2 hours south, and I was like, well, that wouldn't really help 2 hours south, because not only would I be impacting the environment by being there, but I would also have to drive my vehicle down south. I would have to bring food. I would have to just be there and get there, and that would cause an impact to the environment, whether it be good or bad, quite honestly, depending on what your politics are. So just keep it in mind. All right. So thank you all for joining us today. This has been a presentation from the Global Arctic Youth Network. I wanted to give a very special thanks to the 3 people who joined us. So we have Pétur Halldórsson from Iceland, Kate McWilliams from Alaska, the United States, and Stina Bagge from Sweden. Thank you 3 for calling in and joining us on this roundtable discussion. I really do appreciate it, and that's basically all I have to say. You guys are fantastic examples of the youth in the Arctic.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Hilary.
And you're the champion of the webinars.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
so, no worries, Stina. All right, folks. So join us for future seminars. We are going to have a seminar every Sunday from now until the beginning of October 2018. The seminars, I believe there are 4 more after today. So at this time, hopefully I will see you guys calling in next week and all the weeks after that. And if you have a chance to, come join us at the Arctic Youth Summit in October in Rovaniemi, Finland, and to help us share our vision of the Arctic with the world. Thank you all very much, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.